Welcome to the 2 a.m. Theory Podcast. This is where late night thoughts turn into late night conversation.
It's 2 a.m. You're staring up at the ceiling, right?
Oh, yeah. We all know that feeling.
A house is completely quiet and your brain just decides to drop one of those massive, reality-bending thoughts on you.
The worst time for it, too.
Exactly. You realize that 1,000 years from now, historians might dig up our buried server farms. They'll, decrypt all these petabytes of digital film, and they might conclude that our society literally worshipped an armor-clad billionaire.
And an alien in a red cape.
Right. I mean, think about it. Are superheroes the actual, literal mythology of the modern world?
It is, honestly, the ultimate 2 a.m. realization. And, the answer is a resounding yes.
It really is, isn't it?
It is. If you zoom out and look at the 10,000-foot view of human history, every ancient civilization built a pantheon, right? Like, they needed to explain the unexplainable.
Like the Greeks with Hercules and Achilles.
Exactly. They used those myths to process concepts like strength or hubris or mortality.
Right. Or the ancient Britons looking to King Arthur to figure out chivalry in this, brutally violent age.
Yeah, and modern society doesn't gather around a hearth fire to recite the Epic of Gilgamesh anymore.
Definitely not.
No, we pack into multiplexes. We stream these high-definition sagas
Right.
about Wolverine, Invincible, and Iron Man. It's how we make sense of our own chaotic world today.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because our mission for today's deep dive is just massive.
Oh, it's a huge topic.
We have this towering stack of source material here. I mean, we've got creator biographies, historical texts, these really deep thematic analyses.
Stuff that goes way beyond just the comics themselves.
Exactly. And we are going to trace the entire evolution of the comic book revolution. We're looking at how a medium that literally started out as, cheap disposable entertainment.
Printed on the worst paper possible.
Yeah, literally garbage paper. How that morphed into the single most dominant cultural force on the planet.
And we need to be very clear right from the jump here. This isn't just a casual stroll through a library of guys in tights punching each other.
Right, it's not just action scenes.
Not at all. The source material frames this as a profound exploration of human psychology. It's about labor rights, global history, and really the evolution of storytelling itself.
Because these characters didn't just appear in a vacuum.
No, they are highly polished mirrors. They reflect back exactly what the culture was terrified of or, desperately hoping for at the exact moment the ink hit the page.
Which is exactly why this matters to you listening right now. If you want a shortcut to understanding the fears and dreams of our society over the last 90 years, you look at our gods.
You look at our heroes.
Exactly. But to really grasp why we needed to invent these modern gods, we have to travel back to the cultural void that existed right before they arrived.
The absolute desperation of the 1930s.
Yeah, you have to immerse yourself in that era.
You really do.
Yeah.
That 1930s landscape is the crucible for everything we are going to talk about today. You have to, put yourself in that headspace.
Paint that picture for us.
Well, picture America and the broader global stage, too, during this incredibly dark window. You are deep in the suffocating grip of the Great Depression.
It's hard to even conceptualize that level of economic devastation today.
It really is. We're talking mile-long bread lines. People losing their family farms, their homes, their entire life savings in the blink of an eye.
Just because of bank failures they had zero control over.
Exactly. And if that domestic terror wasn't enough, you open the newspaper and see this looming, terrifying shadow of global fascism gathering across Europe and Asia.
So it was an era defined by just a complete and total lack of control. You are at the mercy of systems failing all around you.
Complete helplessness.
Right. So if you're a kid or even an adult in 1934 and you walk up to a city newsstand looking for an escape, what are you actually buying?
Well, back then, you're buying pulp magazines and newspaper comic strips.
And let's explain what pulp actually means here, because I think it's crucial.
Oh,
These were magazines printed on the absolute cheapest, roughest wood pulp paper available. They literally smelled like harsh chemicals and cheap ink.
yeah. They were entirely disposable.
And the heroes in those pages. You had guys like Zorro, Tarzan, The Shadow, Flash Gordon.
And look, they were fantastic characters in their own right, but look at their limitations. They were swashbucklers or jungle adventurers.
Right, trench-coated detectives.
Yeah, and they were inherently mortal. I mean, the Shadow could lurk in a dark alley and shoot a couple of mobsters, and Tarzan could wrestle a lion.
But they couldn't stop a global economic collapse.
Exactly. They couldn't single-handedly dismantle a dictator's invading army. They were bound by the physics of the real world, and the real world at that moment was just incredibly bleak.
They just couldn't lift that crushing existential weight of the era off the reader's shoulders.
They couldn't.
And that specific cultural void is exactly where DC Comics enters the narrative.
Yeah, founded in 1934.
Right, originally under this incredibly bureaucratic name, National Allied Publications.
Which is such a mouthful.
It really is. But their editorial philosophy was anything but bureaucratic. They didn't just want to publish more pulp detectives. They were actively chasing something bigger.
They were leaning into mythology.
Right, into these massive, larger-than-life ideals.
They wanted to build modern titans. And that ambition perfectly intersected with two young, incredibly imaginative friends from Cleveland, Ohio.
Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster.
Exactly. Generation one. The founders. They were the children of Jewish immigrants living in a working-class neighborhood, just looking out at this bleak, depression-ravaged landscape.
They didn't want a detective. They wanted a savior.
A champion. And in 1938, they unleash him on the world in the pages of Action Comics #1.
Superman.
Superman.
I really think of Superman as the literal Big Bang of the entire comic book industry. He is the singularity.
Oh, without a doubt.
Think about the mechanics of what Siegel and Shuster actually invented in that single issue. Because before Superman, comic books were literally just that. They were books of reprinted comic strips that had already run in the Sunday newspaper.
Right, just repackaged content.
Yeah. But Superman brings the very first secret identity. He brings the first cape. He introduces the absolute concept of superhuman abilities.
And once that singularity explodes, it creates the multi-million-dollar dedicated industry we know today.
It's wild, but you have to look at what he represented in 1938.
Yeah, when he debuted, he wasn't just a guy who hit things hard. He was the ultimate embodiment of hope.
The champion of the oppressed?
Exactly. The source material highlights this beautifully. In those early issues, he wasn't fighting intergalactic warlords.
No, he was fighting slumlords.
Yes. He was throwing corrupt politicians in jail. He was dangling abusive husbands out of windows.
I love the story where he forces greedy mine owners to work in their own unsafe coal mines.
Just so they could see how the working class suffered. He was a bulletproof god who cared about the guy standing in the soup line.
Right, and he could leap over the tallest skyscrapers.
Which is a vital detail, because those Art Deco skyscrapers were symbols of modern wealth and progress that felt completely walled off and untouchable to the common man.
Okay, wait, but isn't that inherently hypocritical?
How do you mean?
I really want to push back on the reality of this dynamic based on what the sources say. We have Superman acting as the ultimate champion of the oppressed, fighting greedy landlords in the comic.
Right.
But out in the real world, his creators are getting utterly crushed by corporate exploitation. I mean, Siegel and Shuster, the guys who birthed the most recognizable icon of the 20th century, sold the complete rights to Superman to DC for a flat check of $130.
It's sickening to think about.
$130. They were signing a standard work-for-hire contract, which basically meant the publisher owned everything forever. So how did readers, or even the creators themselves, reconcile the god of justice being owned by a system that was fundamentally denying justice to the people who drew him?
That is the darkest, most profound irony embedded in the foundation of the comic book industry.
It's just so tragic.
It really is. The mechanism of the work-for-hire contract was an absolute meat grinder for early creators. You were paid by the page, and the moment you handed that page in, you surrendered all intellectual property rights.
And they spent decades fighting that, right?
Literally the rest of their natural lives. They fought in and out of courtrooms, living in near poverty at times, just begging for basic recognition and a fraction of the billions their creation was generating.
So does it make Superman a hypocritical symbol?
I'd actually argue it grounds the symbol in tragic reality. It reminds us that our modern mythology wasn't handed down on golden tablets from atop Mount Olympus, you know?
Right. It was hammered out on cheap drafting tables.
Exactly. By struggling, working-class artists who were deeply vulnerable to the exact real-world greed their characters were fighting on the page.
That paints such a vivid, heartbreaking picture. The artists were mortal, but the god they created was untouchable.
Completely untouchable.
But from a storytelling perspective, if you introduce the perfect, invincible god of light, you immediately run into a problem.
Perfection gets boring.
Quickly, the pendulum of narrative has to swing. Action requires reaction. If you have the light, you have to explore the dark.
We needed a hero who was vulnerable.
Right, someone forged in trauma. Which brings us to 1939. Just 1 year after Superman arrives, the pendulum swings with the force of a wrecking ball, giving us Batman.
And what's fascinating here is the historical correction that the source material focuses really heavily on.
Oh, this is a crazy story.
It really is. For nearly 80 years, if you picked up any Batman comic, watched any movie, or bought any toy, it said, Batman, created by Bob Kane.
Right, Bob Kane.
Yeah, Bob Kane negotiated this ruthless contract early on that guaranteed him sole exclusive credit. He got the glory, he got the mansion, he went to all the Hollywood parties.
But he didn't actually create the character we know.
No. Modern historians have painstakingly proven that a man named Bill Finger was the true, uncredited architect of the mythos.
The mechanism of that credit theft is just wild, because Bob Kane's initial pitch for Batman, which he literally called the Batman, was a guy with blonde hair.
Wearing a bright red leotard.
Yes. A red leotard, a domino mask, and these stiff, rigid bat wings that look like a Da Vinci sketch.
It looked absolutely nothing like the character we know.
Not at all. So Kane brings this sketch to Bill Finger, who is a brilliant, pulp-obsessed writer, and Finger basically redesigns it from the ground up.
Finger looks at it and says, let's drop the red suit, let's make it dark gray and black, let's lose the domino mask and give him a cowl so he actually looks terrifying.
And the blank white eyes.
Right, to remove his humanity. And he gave him the scalloped cape instead of those stiff wings.
And Finger actually wrote the first story, right?
He wrote the first story. He named the city Gotham. He came up with the name Bruce Wayne. He even co-created the Joker and Catwoman.
That is insane.
He was essentially a ghostwriter and ghost designer, getting paid under the table out of Kane's pocket, while Kane took all the historical credit.
It's another brutal chapter of creator rights. But looking at the actual character Finger and Kane birthed, Batman represents this massive, necessary philosophical shift away from the Superman archetype.
It is a total 180.
Yeah, he has no superpowers. He isn't an alien sent from a dying utopian world. He has no magic rings.
He's just flesh, bone, and obsession.
Exactly. He is a human being pushed to the absolute zenith of his physical and mental potential.
Because if Superman is about hope descending from the sky, Batman is about weaponizing trauma from the ground up.
Right. You have a child who witnesses the brutal, senseless murder of his parents in a random act of street violence.
But instead of letting that profound PTSD destroy him, or, turning to conventional therapy.
Which he probably should have done.
Probably. But instead, he channels it into absolute punishing discipline. And the critical psychological distinction is that he chooses justice over revenge.
He doesn't just buy a gun and hunt down his parents' killer to exact a blood debt.
No. He decides to become an enduring symbol of terror to all criminals.
But logically, a character that intensely dark, that singular in his obsession, risks alienating the reader.
Oh, absolutely.
If he's just this brooding, traumatized billionaire lurking in the shadows, he's incredibly difficult for a child to relate to. And the publishers knew who was actually buying these 10-cent books.
Kids were buying them.
Right. So in 1940, they execute what might be the most brilliant psychological pivot in the history of the medium. They introduce Robin.
From a purely visual standpoint, having a kid in bright red, yellow, and green flipping around a dark, gothic alleyway next to a brooding vigilante makes zero sense.
It's ridiculous visually.
But mechanically, as a piece of narrative design and marketing, it was a masterstroke.
Because Robin was the psychological anchor for the reader.
Exactly. A 10-year-old kid buying a comic couldn't project themselves into the shoes of a billionaire with severe trauma.
But they could absolutely imagine themselves as the plucky acrobat who gets adopted by Batman and gets to drive the Batmobile.
Robin literally births the sidekick archetype. Almost every modern sidekick traces their DNA directly back to Dick Grayson.
But it also softened Batman, didn't it?
It did. It introduced the theme of mentorship. It proved Batman wasn't just a lonely punisher. He was a surrogate father, desperately trying to ensure this newly orphaned kid didn't go down the same dark, isolating path he did.
And that dynamic kept the books flying off the shelves. But as we move out of the 1930s, the real world was hurtling toward a conflict that made street-level crime look, well, insignificant.
We're moving from personal trauma in Gotham City to a global existential trauma.
World War II is at America's doorstep.
And when we look at how the comic book industry reacted to World War II, we are looking at the absolute peak of what historians call the Golden Age.
Yeah, and reading the source material about the Golden Age, you really see how these early eras weren't just arbitrary dates. They were survival mechanisms for the American psyche.
The Golden Age was defined by absolute moral clarity. Good was good, evil was evil, And the heroes were flawless paragons of virtue.
And nothing embodies that era quite like the ultimate symbol of duty, Captain America.
Created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby in 1941.
The historical context surrounding Captain America's debut is staggering. You have to remember the timeline here. This comic book hit the newsstands before the United States had officially entered World War II.
Right, Pearl Harbor hadn't happened yet.
The country was deeply divided by the isolationist movement. There were massive political rallies in America explicitly arguing that the war in Europe wasn't our problem.
And in the midst of that intense political tension, two Jewish creators, Simon and Kirby, create a hero wrapped in the American flag.
And on the cover of issue #1, they don't have him fighting a generic bank robber.
No, they draw him flat out punching Adolf Hitler in the jaw.
It's incredible. It is one of the most visceral, unapologetic examples of a commercial medium responding directly to real-world geopolitics.
It wasn't disguised as subtext.
Not at all. It was a blatantly aggressive political statement. Cap was a symbol of courage, of patriotism, and of proactive resistance against tyranny.
And just to be completely clear to the listener here, we are not taking a stance on the isolationist politics of the 1940s.
Right. We are purely examining how these creators leveraged their art to broadcast their own deeply held values.
And urge their country toward intervention. And it was incredibly dangerous for them, too.
Yeah, didn't they get death threats?
Simon and Kirby received actual death threats from American Nazi sympathizers. There were reports of menacing crowds gathering outside the Timely Comics publishing office.
That is terrifying.
It got so bad that the mayor of New York, Fiorello LaGuardia, personally called the office to offer them police protection.
Wow.
Captain America's very existence was an act of defiance. He represented the idealized vision of what America believed its duty should be, even when the actual government was hesitating.
So the Golden Age serves its purpose. Superman gives us hope, Batman shows us resilience, Captain America defines duty.
The heroes go to war, they boost morale, they punch out dictators, and the Allies win.
But then the 1950s roll around, the troops come home, the post-war economy is booming, you have the rise of the suburbs, the white picket fence, the television set in every living room.
And suddenly, perfection feels profoundly boring.
Exactly. The cultural landscape shifted, and the flawless gods of the Golden Age didn't fit anymore.
If you're a restless teenager in the late 1950s or early 1960s, a square-jawed hero who never makes a mistake, always tells the truth, and always wins, just doesn't reflect your reality at all.
Sales were slumping, the industry was actually contracting, the heroes needed a massive overhaul.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The revolution doesn't come from DC, the house that Superman built.
Right.
It comes from an upstart competitor called Marvel.
Which had been around since 1939 under different names, like Timely.
Yeah, but they didn't become a cultural titan until the 1960s, and they did it by asking a revolutionary question that completely inverted the DC formula.
What would happen if ordinary, deeply flawed, neurotic people suddenly got extraordinary powers?
It was a monumental paradigm shift. Okay. We entered Generation 2, the revolutionaries.
The dawn of the Silver Age.
And the architects of this era are the Holy Trinity of Marvel: Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Steve Ditko.
You have Stan Lee, who was the charismatic editor, writer, and ultimate showman.
Right, the guy who realized that readers wanted to feel like they were part of an exclusive club.
He wrote letter columns that spoke directly to the fans.
But his biggest narrative contribution was the insistence on emotional relatability. He wanted heroes who bickered, who paid taxes, who got sick.
Then you pair Stair with Jack Kirby. They called him the king of comics for a reason.
Kirby had this boundless, kinetic, visual imagination.
He designed the sprawling cosmic architecture of the Marvel Universe, the incredible technology, the dynamic action poses where characters look like they were exploding off the page.
It was all Kirby.
And working alongside them was Steve Ditko, the reclusive, brilliant artist who co-created Spider-Man.
Ditko had this highly idiosyncratic, almost awkward art style. He didn't draw chiseled gods. He drew lanky, uncomfortable people.
And we have to talk about the mechanism of how they actually worked, known as the Marvel method.
Yes, because Stan Lee was so overworked that he couldn't write full scripts.
Right.
So he would pitch a basic plot to Kirby or Ditko, sometimes just a conversation over lunch.
So they didn't even write a script.
Exactly, they just talked over lunch. The artist would go home, draw all 20 pages, pace out the entire story, and basically direct the comic visually.
Oh.
Then Stan would get the art back and write the dialogue blooms to fit the pictures.
It created incredibly dynamic stories, but it also sowed the seeds for massive credit disputes later on.
Oh, huge disputes. Because the artists were acting as uncredited co-writers.
It's the Bill Finger situation all over again, just in a different decade. But looking at the characters born from this Marvel method, it's just astonishing. Let's look at the psychology of the major Silver Age creations, starting with the crown jewel of 1962, Spider-Man.
Before Peter Parker, teenagers in comic books were strictly sidekicks.
They were the Robins and the Bucky Barneses. The adults were the heroes.
But Stan Lee and Steve Ditko made the awkward, unpopular science nerd teenager the main event.
Which shattered the entire industry mold. Because Spider-Man isn't fundamentally about fighting the Green Goblin. He's about the agonizing weight of responsibility.
The famous mantra, "With great power there must also come great responsibility," isn't a triumphant war cry.
No, it is a suffocating curse.
The mechanism of a Spider-Man story is that Peter Parker is constantly brutally punished for doing the right thing.
Right. If he skips a high school exam to stop a bank robbery, he fails the class.
If he fights Dr. Octopus, he misses his date with Mary Jane and she dumps him.
If he buys web fluid, his Aunt May can't pay the rent. His heroism actively destroys his personal life.
It's basically the anxiety of puberty and impending adulthood stuffed into a red and blue suit.
It resonated on a frequency that a billionaire like Bruce Wayne or an alien like Superman never could.
And speaking of anxiety, that same year, 1962, gives us a very different kind of internal terror, the Incredible Hulk.
Yeah, if Spider-Man represents the everyday anxiety of the teenager, the Hulk is the existential dread of an entire nation.
He is the direct byproduct of the Cold War and the nuclear arms race.
The Hulk is atomic age paranoia made flesh. The culture was terrified of what science had unlocked.
We had bombs that could vaporize cities, and we were doing above-ground radiation testing.
Bruce Banner is a brilliant repressed scientist caught in a gamma bomb blast, and his resulting transformations explore the terrifying depths of human rage.
It's a Jekyll and Hyde metaphor updated for the nuclear era. It explores the fragile boundary between control and chaos.
The terrifying question the Hulk poses is, what happens when the monster you're so afraid of isn't a foreign army, but an uncontrollable rage hiding inside your own mind?
You literally can't escape it.
And rounding out this Marvel trio in 1963, we get Iron Man, created by Lee, Kirby, and Don Heck.
If the Hulk is the fear of science, Iron Man explores the weaponization of it.
Tony Stark was designed to reflect America's booming military-industrial complex, but look at the contrast. Superman's power is innate. Spider-Man gets his by total accident.
Tony Stark's power is entirely a product of human engineering.
Iron Man was a massive gamble by Stan Lee. He intentionally created a character that the counterculture readership of the 1960s should have hated.
Right. A wealthy, arrogant, capitalist weapons manufacturer who profits off war.
But he injures Stark with his own shrapnel, forcing him to build a magnetic chest plate just to keep his heart beating.
And a suit of armor to escape captivity. It becomes a story about ingenuity and, crucially, corporate redemption.
How does a man who spent his life building technology designed to kill people pivot to using his genius to save them?
So Marvel completely redefines the landscape. They prove that heroes can be neurotic, self-destructive, and deeply arrogant.
But as we move out of the 1960s and plunge into the 1970s and 1980s, the cultural mood of the real world darkens significantly.
You have the grueling fallout of the Vietnam War.
You have the Watergate scandal shattering public trust in government.
You have oil crises and severe economic recessions. The colorful, relatively optimistic angst of the Silver Age suddenly feels incredibly naive.
The audience didn't just want flaws anymore, they wanted grit. They wanted characters who reflected a cynical, broken world.
This is the transition into the Bronze Age and eventually the Dark Age of comics.
The clear lines between hero and villain are completely erased, giving rise to the era of the anti-hero.
And the absolute poster child for this shift is Wolverine, who makes his full debut in 1974.
Wolverine is a violent rejection of the Golden and Silver Age archetypes.
He isn't a patriotic Boy Scout like Captain America.
And he certainly isn't driven by a noble, crippling sense of responsibility like Spider-Man.
He is a completely different beast. He is incredibly violent. He's short-tempered, deeply scarred, and haunted by a past he can't even remember.
He drinks heavily, he smokes cigars, he insults his teammates.
He isn't trying to save the world. He is just trying to survive his own mind and body.
The audience in the 1970s, exhausted by political betrayal and senseless war, resonated with a guy who essentially said, The world is an ugly, violent place, and sometimes you need an ugly, violent man to survive it.
And that profound cynicism and rebellion wasn't just happening on the printed page. It was brewing behind the scenes in the actual business of making comics.
The creators who grew up reading those early work-for-hire tragedies were now drawing the books themselves.
And they were furious at the system. This brings us to the late 1980s and early 1990s and the rise of Generation 3, the rebels.
The creator revolution. This is honestly one of the most fascinating business stories in pop culture. It all centers around a young, fiery artist named Todd McFarlane.
In the late 80s, Marvel gives McFarlane the art duties for Spider-Man.
And McFarlane looks at how Spider-Man has been drawn for 30 years, clean, proportional, neat, and he throws it in the trash.
He completely revolutionizes the character visually.
He draws Spider-Man in these impossible, contorted arachnid poses. He gives him massive, alien-looking bug eyes.
And most famously, he changes the webbing. It used to be drawn as a single, clean line.
Right.
McFarlane draws it as this chaotic, tangled, spaghetti-like mess.
Yeah.
The fans went absolutely wild for it.
McFarlane becomes a rock star. Marvel gives him a brand new Spider-Man title just to write and draw himself, and the first issue sells over 2.5 million copies.
But McFarlane's visual rebellion was just a warm-up for his corporate rebellion.
Because he looks around at the millions of dollars he is generating for Marvel Comics, and he looks at his own paycheck.
And he realizes the fundamental mechanism hasn't changed since Siegel and Shuster sold Superman for $130.
The corporation owns the IP, the creator gets a page rate, and maybe a small royalty.
McFarlane and a group of other absolute superstar artists, guys like Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, Mark Silvestri, realize they have all the leverage.
Because the fans aren't buying the books for the Marvel logo. They are buying them for the artists.
It is the ultimate labor strike.
Bro.
In 1992, these superstar artists walk into the Marvel offices and they quit.
They execute a mass exodus that sends shockwaves through the entire entertainment industry.
They leave the biggest publisher on Earth and pool their resources to found Image Comics.
And the foundational mechanism of Image Comics was a direct, aggressive middle finger to the old system.
Their charter was simple. We do not own your characters. You own your characters. You keep the intellectual property, you keep the movie rights, you keep the toy money.
It completely upended the power dynamic, and the face of this new creator-owned revolution was Todd McFarlane's own character, Spawn, who debuted in 1992.
Spawn is the quintessential Dark Age anti-hero. He's a Black Ops government assassin who makes a literal Faustian deal with a demon to see his wife one last time.
And is sent back to Earth as a scarred, brooding hellspawn.
The aesthetic was pure 90s heavy metal. Massive chains, an impossibly huge cape, spikes, extreme violence.
But beneath the edge, it was fundamentally a story about fighting for redemption against an insurmountable, corrupt system.
Which mirrored exactly what McFarlane was doing in the industry. Spawn sold over 1 million copies of its first issue, proving definitively that creators did not need the corporate machines of Marvel or DC to be massively successful.
And Image wasn't the only pioneer in this space. The source material highlights Dark Horse Comics, founded in 1986 by Mike Richardson.
Dark Horse operated on a very similar philosophy. Respect the creator, let them own their work, and let them tell stories that don't fit the traditional superhero mold.
They became a sanctuary for the weird, the dark, and the brilliant.
Which perfectly sets the stage for Mike Mignola. In 1993, at Dark Horse, Mignola creates Hellboy.
Hellboy is a masterpiece of tone and world building.
He's a demon summoned to Earth by occult Nazis during World War II, but he's rescued by the Allies and raised in secret to be a paranormal investigator.
It's an incredible, moody blend of gothic horror, deep European folklore, and blue-collar pulp action.
Mignola's art style was revolutionary too. He used heavy, drowning shadows and minimalist line work to create a world that felt ancient and decaying.
And conceptually, Hellboy is profound. He has the literal right hand of doom, and it is prophesied that he will unlock the apocalypse.
But he takes a power sander, files down his own demonic horns, and actively chooses to protect humanity.
It's a story about defying your destiny and choosing who you become.
Between creator-owned hits like Hellboy and proving they could handle massive, licensed film properties like Aliens and Star Wars, Dark Horse proved the big two publishers no longer had a monopoly on great storytelling.
So you have this medium that has matured through the Golden Age, introduced flawed humanity in the Silver Age, descended into grit in the Dark Age, and revolutionized its own labor laws in the 90s.
The comic book ecosystem became incredibly rich and diverse.
But then, an inevitable evolution occurs. The characters become so iconic, the underlying mythology becomes so potent that it bursts out of the printed page entirely.
The stories become too big for paper. We enter the era of Hollywood conquest.
The journey from 10-cent pulp magazines to billion-dollar global blockbusters is a fascinating technological and cultural trajectory.
It started with distinct, vital milestones. In 1978, Richard Donner's Superman movie hit theaters.
The tagline was, "You will believe a man can fly."
It treated the source material with absolute earnestness and respect, proving you could make a prestige film out of a comic book.
Then, in 1989, Tim Burton's Batman proved these characters could be dark, visually stylized, massive merchandising phenomenons.
But the real shift happens when the technology finally catches up to the limitless imagination of guys like Jack Kirby and Todd McFarlane.
Right, the CGI. In 2002, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man shows that CGI has advanced enough to convincingly portray a human being swinging dynamically through the canyons of New York City.
And then comes 2008, Iron Man, the birth of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Suddenly, Hollywood wasn't just adapting single stories, they were adapting the very mechanism of comic books.
Serialization. They built an interconnected, massive, multi-franchise cinematic universe that unspooled over dozens of films.
Which leads to a really provocative question. You have DC films, you have prestige animated series, you have massive streaming shows dominating the cultural conversation.
The audience for an opening weekend of an Avengers movie completely dwarfs the readership of a monthly comic book by millions.
So, did the comic books actually become bigger than comics themselves? Are the movies the real medium now, and the printed comics are just low-cost research and development labs for Hollywood producers?
It's a compelling argument. The movies certainly have the reach, but the printed page is still where the pure, unfiltered innovation happens because the financial risk is lower.
Which brings us to the modern deconstruction of the genre. If we have seen every type of hero on screen and on the page over the last 80 years, what is left to say?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to talk about Robert Kirkman.
The source material refers to him as the modern visionary.
He took the creator-owned ethos of Image Comics and built massive empires like The Walking Dead. But in 2003, alongside artist Cory Walker, he created a comic that acts as the ultimate postgraduate thesis on the superhero genre.
Invincible.
Invincible is an absolute masterclass in taking 80 years of established tropes, setting them up perfectly, and then violently pulling the rug out from under the reader.
A huge part of this revolves around the character of Omni-Man.
Omni-Man is essentially Kirkman's version of Superman.
Mm-hmm.
He has the cape, the glorious mustache, the origin story of an alien coming to Earth to act as a noble savior.
But Kirkman asks a terrifying question. What happens when the world's greatest hero, the guy everyone trusts implicitly, isn't actually good?
What if the whole savior narrative is a lie, and he is actually the vanguard for a fascist alien empire sent to conquer us?
The revelation of Omni-Man's true nature genuinely shocked modern audiences because it violently shattered the foundational trust that Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster established back in 1938.
Omni-Man represents a terrifying Darwinian logic. If a being is virtually immortal and can fly through a skyscraper without flinching, why would he ever submit to the moral laws of fragile, mortal humans?
It explores the horrifying reality of absolute power without human morality.
But the true emotional core of the narrative is his son, Mark Grayson, who is invincible.
The text notes that Mark is essentially the culmination of the entire history we've discussed today. Think about his narrative DNA.
He has the vast cosmic power and the initial bright optimism of Superman.
He deals with the excruciating teenage relatability, the school problems, and the agonizing personal responsibility of Spider-Man.
And over the course of the story, he is subjected to the visceral, bloody, survival-driven physical suffering of Wolverine.
And crucially, Invincible injects brutal, uncompromising realism into the fantasy framework. This isn't the golden or silver age.
When two gods have a fistfight in the middle of Chicago in a classic comic, the buildings crumble, but everyone is fine, and by the next issue, the city is magically rebuilt.
In Invincible, the mechanism of violence has weight. When super beings fight in a subway station, it is a catastrophic, horrifying mass casualty event.
The physical trauma leaves permanent scars. Characters make mistakes, people die, and they stay dead.
The overarching narrative is about growing up, facing the horrifying complexities of the real world, and truly earning your heroism in a universe that absolutely refuses to hand out easy moral victories.
It is the perfect capstone to this massive journey. We started with the simple, necessary hope of a bulletproof man in 1938.
And we arrived at the bloody, painfully earned maturity of invincible in the modern era. So as we bring this massive 2 a.m. theory full circle, we can see clearly that the history of comic books isn't really about people flying or shooting lasers.
It's an ongoing, rolling record of human psychology. Each successive generation takes the tools of this medium and creates a new mirror to reflect its own specific anxieties, values, and dreams.
When you look at the whole tapestry, the evolution is striking. In the crushing desperation of the 1930s depression, a bulletproof Superman gave us hope.
As the world prepared to plunge into World War II, a flag-wearing Captain America defined proactive duty.
When teenagers gained cultural and economic power in the 60s, an awkward Spider-Man taught us the agonizing weight of responsibility.
As the Cold War escalated, the Hulk embodied our radioactive fear, and Iron Man wrestled with the ethics of innovation.
In the cynical post-Watergate 70s, Wolverine survived through pure, stubborn pain.
During the labor rebellions of the 90s, Spawn fought for creator redemption.
And today, in a world drowning in moral ambiguity, Invincible demands that we approach power with maturity.
So what does this all mean? Our source material poses one final, deeply philosophical question about the nature of our modern mythology.
If every ancient and modern civilization creates heroes that act as a mirror for their deepest values, what does it say about us right now that our most beloved heroes aren't perfect, untouchable gods?
What does it mean that we prefer deeply flawed, traumatized, anxious people who stumble, who fail, but who choose to do the right thing anyway?
It suggests that we finally understand that heroism isn't about perfection, it's about the struggle.
But I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over tonight, taking us right back to that 2 a.m. feeling.
Lay it on us.
Think about how ancient mythology survived the centuries. We know about Hercules and Achilles because of fragmented oral traditions, broken clay tablets, and ruined marble statues.
It barely survived.
But our modern mythology, it is meticulously, obsessively preserved. It is backed up in 8K digital film, replicated across thousands of global server farms.
Printed in millions of trade paperbacks and locked in billion-dollar corporate vaults.
How on earth will historians 2,000 or 3,000 years from now interpret this massive data hoard? When they decrypt the servers containing the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the DC archives, will they understand it was entertainment?
Or will they look at the sheer volume of wealth, time, and artistic devotion we poured into these stories and conclude that we literally built shrines to an armor-clad billionaire and a teenager bitten by a radioactive spider?
Are we accidentally leaving behind the most documented religion in human history?
That is exactly the kind of thought that keeps you staring at the ceiling. A massive thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the comic book revolution.
Keep looking for the mythology hiding in plain sight all around you.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.